Chapter 1. The Eyes That Burned. The sun was ruthless. It hovered high in the sky, pouring waves of oppressive heat across the wide fields of cotton and sorrow. Each ray seemed designed not to nurture, but to punish, turning every breath into effort and every movement into misery. Kwasi moved in silence through it all. His muscles flexed with the steady rhythm of a man used to labor, but his face remained stone. Others grunted and panted in exhaustion, but Kwasi stayed quiet, expressionless. He knew better than to show weakness or weariness. Both were dangerous currency on land that did not belong to him. Around him, the overseer's whip cracked in the distance, but Kwasi paid it no mind. His body obeyed the brutal demands placed upon it, yet his spirit wandered elsewhere. They called him Elijah here, a name branded upon him like the ownership that defined this place. But when the moon rose and whispers traveled between the walls, he was something else entirely. His mother's voice still echoed in his ears after all these years, soft and sure in the dead of night, when he had been no more than a boy taken too soon from his home. You are Kwasi. No matter what name they give you, my son, you are Kwasi. And so he was. Hidden beneath the skin and scars, beneath the stolen name and shackles, Kwasi remained. He clung to himself with a quiet defiance no one could touch. He belonged to no one. Not really. That afternoon, as sweat slicked his back and the air buzzed with insects and cruelty, he felt the stare again. It wasn't new. For days now, he had noticed her watching him. Annabelle LeClaire, the daughter of the master, pristine in pale silk and lace even in this stifling heat, stood poised on the large veranda like porcelain royalty. Her golden curls were pinned delicately, her gloved hands resting gently on the banister, but her eyes burned hotter than the sun. They tracked him across the field with the intensity of obsession, a gaze far too focused to be casual. She studied him not as a laborer, but as a puzzle, or perhaps a temptation. Kwasi did not return the stare, not openly, but he felt it like fingers brushing his skin, crawling slowly, exploring without permission. The longer she looked, the more he understood. Curiosity, hunger, desire, a dangerous trinity. He knew this game. White women did not look at men like him that way without consequences. He knew stories, dark, brutal stories, about what happened when forbidden lines blurred. But he also knew something else: opportunity. If she was watching, he could use that. If she wanted something from him, he could feed that want, control it, guide it. For freedom, for survival, he would play whatever part he needed to. So he kept his eyes low and his face blank, but his mind sharpened like a blade. Each step, each movement, each stolen glance was part of the preparation. Annabelle was beautiful, yes. Her lips were soft and pink, her skin unblemished, her voice melodic when she laughed with her friends in the cool shade. But she wasn't Amara. Amara, his true love, his promised woman. Annabelle's glances might burn, but Amara's memory burned brighter. Every night, her name was his prayer and his comfort in a world designed to break him. Still, Kwasi knew better than to turn away from what fate offered. He was a man of calculation, and as he carried the heavy sack across his shoulder and caught Annabelle biting her lip, he understood the path opening before him. This was a new game now, and he intended to win it. End of Chapter 1. Chapter 2. Subtle Whispers. The days grew quieter, though Kwasi felt the tension hum beneath them, like an invisible thread being pulled tighter and tighter. Annabelle no longer pretended. Where once she had simply watched him from afar, veiled by her parasol or the shadows of the veranda, now she approached, timid at first, but closer each time. She started small. The first time, it was as innocent as a brush of fingertips when she handed him a pitcher of water. Her skin grazed his, and though he kept his head bowed, he could feel her eyes drinking in his every reaction. He gave her none. But the second time, it was no accident. She lingered longer, her fingers curling just enough around his hand, as though reluctant to let go. She giggled nervously and murmured about the heat, though her voice trembled more from desire than discomfort. Quasi remained still, controlled. Inside, he catalogued everything. She was testing him now, testing herself. By the third time, Annabelle abandoned all pretenses. She came to him under the guise of kindness. "Would you help me carry this to the stable, Elijah?" Her voice was soft, laced with something fragile and eager. He nodded, as any obedient man in his position would. But when they were alone in the cool, musty air of the stable, her mask cracked. Her hand brushed against his arm, bare, glistening with sweat and hardened by work. She trailed her fingers deliberately, marveling at the texture of his skin, the definition of his muscles. There was no mistaking her intent. "You are strong," she whispered, voice breathy and uneven. Quasi did not speak. He merely looked down at her, expression unreadable but calculating. Let her speak. Let her reveal herself. This was the key to power, he knew. Patience. Annabelle pressed closer, emboldened by his silence. Her hand smoothed up his bicep, then across his shoulder. The touch was tender, almost reverent. Quasi stood immovable, offering no rejection but no invitation either. She craved his reaction. He could see it in her eyes, the desperation, the hunger to be acknowledged by the very man she knew she should not desire. She wanted to be devoured, yet needed him to pretend she still held the reins. "Do you ever think of things you shouldn't?" she asked quietly, almost ashamed as she traced small circles on his arm. Quasi finally moved, tilting his head slightly as his dark, intense eyes locked onto hers. His voice, low and smooth, came like smoke curling through the space between them. "I think about many things," he said, neither denying nor admitting anything. That alone made her knees weaken. He saw the flush spread across her chest, the way she swallowed thickly as tension thickened around them. Before she could cross any more boundaries, Quasi stepped back. Not out of modesty, but control. He left her standing there, lips parted, body humming with unfulfilled desire. Leave them wanting. Always. That night, as Quasi lay on his pallet staring at the stars beyond the cracked shutters, he reflected carefully. She was hooked now. Her touches, her questions, her stolen glances, all signs of a woman slowly drowning in her own forbidden longing. She was dangerous, yes, but she was also an opportunity growing riper each day. He turned his head, whispering the name only the night could hear. Amara. This was all for her. Every touch Annabelle dared to steal, every temptation she laid bare. It was all just fuel for the escape that would one day reunite him with the only woman who truly held his heart. End of Chapter 2. Chapter 3. The Touch Beneath. Twilight settled over the land like a hush. The heat of the day surrendered to a slow, golden cool, and the air filled with the faint songs of cicadas and the heavy scent of soil and sweat. Quasi moved silently, his body as attuned to the rhythm of evening as it was to the grind of labor. He had just stacked the last barrel near the storage shed when he sensed it, her presence. Before he turned, he already knew it was her, Annabelle. She was standing near the doorway, her silhouette bathed in the soft lavender light of dusk, her breath shallow, her hands fidgeting with the edge of her apron. Her hair was loose, not the tight, pristine bun she usually wore. It spilled in golden waves over her shoulders, and her cheeks were flushed with something unspoken. "I didn't mean to startle you," she said, voice quiet, almost fragile. Quasi said nothing. He stepped back from the barrels and wiped his brow with the back of his arm, waiting. "I came to see if you needed anything." Her words stumbled. "Water, or rest." Still, he didn't answer. He let the silence stretch, thick and pressing. He could see the pulse fluttering in her neck, hear the tiny hitch in her breath as her eyes scanned the lines of his body, the curve of his shoulders, the strength in his arms. "Do you ever get tired?" she asked softly. His voice, when it came, was low and smooth. Of what? Her eyes flicked up to meet his. Of pretending. Of hiding what you feel. Kwasi's face remained impassive, but inside, his mind sharpened. She took a tentative step forward. You feel something, don't you? Her voice quivered with both hope and fear. And then it happened. She stepped in closer, close enough that he could smell her perfume, that faint blend of lavender and something sweeter. She reached down, trembling, and took his hand, rough, calloused, powerful, and with deliberate, aching slowness, guided it beneath the folds of her cotton skirt. Kwasi's breath stayed even. Her flesh was warm, slick, and trembling against his fingers. He let her guide him, her breath catching in her throat as her thighs tightened around his hand. Do you feel that? She whispered, pressing her forehead to his chest, her voice thin and breaking. Do you feel what you do to me? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. His hand moved with skillful control, not eager, but measured, stroking her softly, exploring the edges of her desire while his expression remained unreadable. She whimpered softly, biting her lip to silence it, her fingers clutching at his shirt as if she might float away from her own body. Kwasi leaned down, his mouth brushing against the shell of her ear. You shouldn't be here. Annabelle moaned, a small, pleading sound. I want to be. He withdrew his hand slowly, leaving her breathless and trembling. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, the scent of her arousal clinging to his fingers, to his skin, to his mind like smoke. That night, Annabelle lay awake in her bed, sheets tangled around her legs, her thighs still throbbing from his touch. She was consumed. A flame had been lit inside her, and nothing would ever be the same. That night, Kwasi lay awake on his pallet, eyes open to the rafters. He did not think of Annabelle. He thought of Amara, of her voice, her skin, her promise, and the freedom he would reach with her beside him. Every touch from Annabelle was just another stone in the path toward that future, and he would walk it, one calculated step at a time. End of Chapter 3. Chapter 4. Forbidden Confession. The rain came late that afternoon, soft and warm, falling over the plantation like a lullaby. The fields breathed for the first time in days. Dust turned to mud, sweat washed from skin, and even the air seemed to sigh in relief. Kwasi moved through it like a ghost, silent, observing. He knew the rhythm of the land better than any man born into its ownership. He could feel shifts in wind, changes in posture, and the tension that pulsed just beneath every surface. That night, the house was quiet. The storm had driven the family inside early, and the servants were given extra time to themselves, a rare mercy. Kwasi used it to walk, barefoot and unbothered by the mud, the hem of his worn pants damp as he made his way toward the edge of the property where the shed stood, dry, dark, and forgotten. She was already there, Annabelle. She wore a nightgown, no corset, no shoes. Her hair hung loose and dripping down her back, the rain making it cling to her like ivy. You came, she whispered, a trembling smile pulling at her lips. Kwasi didn't answer. He stepped inside the small space, the scent of wood and wet cotton thick between them. The door closed with a thud behind him, muting the sound of the rain. Annabelle crossed the room with bare feet and stopped inches from him. Her hands reached for his chest, tentative but needy, and her fingers curled into the fabric of his shirt as she looked up at him. I tried to stop this, she said. I tried to fight what I feel. Kwasi's expression didn't change, but his silence invited her to go on. I see you, she continued, her voice low and raw. I see you in my dreams. I wake up aching, thinking about your hands, about your eyes, about what it would be like if you were mine. Kwasi could feel the desperation rolling off her like steam from wet skin. I know it's wrong, she whispered, But I don't care. I don't want to care. She leaned into him, her lips brushing his collarbone. Her arms wrapped around his waist as she pressed her face into his chest, like a woman pleading for sanctuary. I love you. The words trembled into the space between them and hung there, dangerous and irreversible. Quasi closed his eyes, not from shock, not from emotion, but from focus. This was the moment he'd waited for. He let his arms come around her, slow, deliberate, strong, and rested his chin gently against the crown of her head. He exhaled a breath that wasn't quite relief and whispered, "Then don't fight it." She looked up at him, wide-eyed, teary, hopeful. "You mean it?" Quasi met her gaze, letting just enough softness flicker across his features. "I mean what you need me to," he said softly, then leaned down and kissed her. It was a kiss of dominance, of permission, of control. Her lips parted eagerly, her body pressed into him. She sighed against his mouth like it was air after drowning. That night, in that shed, he held her like a man in love. He stroked her hair, whispered her name, and laid her down on the dusty floor like she was a treasure meant to be cherished. But when she fell asleep in his arms, tears still drying on her cheeks, Quasi's eyes remained open. He stared into the shadows and thought of chains, of maps, of Amara. This was not love. This was strategy, and he was playing it masterfully. End of Chapter 4. Chapter 5. Fractures and Fire. The fire was dying in the hearth, but the storm outside had only just begun. Thunder cracked against the sky, rattling the walls of the small cabin where they had taken shelter. The smell of wet wood and old straw clung to the air. Rain beat against the roof like a warning, or perhaps a blessing. It was the kind of night that dared the world to fall apart. Annabelle's hands trembled as she lit a single candle on the table, its flame casting flickering shadows across her face. Her gown was soaked through, clinging to her in a way that left little to the imagination, her breath coming quick and shallow. Quasi stood at the far end of the room, his arms crossed, his body still dripping with rain. He watched her with unreadable eyes. She could barely meet them. She turned slowly, the flame behind her throwing golden light into her hair, and whispered, "I needed to see you." Quasi didn't move. "You shouldn't be here." "I don't care." Her voice cracked on the edge of something fragile. I can't sleep. Not when I don't know if you're near. Not when I don't know if I still matter to you." Quasi stepped forward once. It wasn't aggressive, just enough to close the space between them, to make the silence heavier. Annabelle looked up at him, eyes shimmering. "I love you." It wasn't the first time she had said it, but this time it hung in the air differently. Not desperate, not afraid, certain. He could see it in her, the way her body leaned toward him, the way her lip quivered without shame. She had given herself to him, not just in body but in belief. She believed he loved her too. She needed him to. Quasi reached out, brushing a wet strand of hair from her face. His hand lingered at her jawline, and he tilted her head up gently. "I need you," he whispered, his voice thick with what she wanted to hear. She broke, a soft sound, a whimper, and launched herself into his arms. Their mouths met in a fevered kiss, not gentle, not teasing, hungry. She tugged at his soaked shirt, her fingers sliding along the ridges of his chest as he pulled her tighter. She was fire in his hands, writhing, pleading, eager. They moved to the pallet by the wall, the single candle throwing their shadows in wild shapes. He laid her down slowly, reverently, and began to strip the wet gown from her skin. She gasped as cool air touched her bare breasts, as his lips followed the trail down her collarbone. "Please," she whispered, "please don't stop." He didn't, not yet. His hands roamed every curve, every soft place. He memorized her with the eyes of a man who needed to convince her she was wanted. His mouth worshipped her skin, each kiss a promise he didn't mean. And when he entered her, slow, thick, deep, she cried out, her fingers clawing into his back, her legs trembling around his waist. He moved like a man possessed, like a man who needed this moment, but his thoughts were 1,000 miles away. Her body was warm, welcoming, pulsing with love. His body responded, but his heart? His heart was cold stone. He was acting, perfectly. She came undone beneath him, moaning his name like a prayer, whispering broken pieces of her soul between kisses. When it was over, she lay tangled in his arms, tears drying on her cheeks, her heart now fully in his hands. And Quasi? He lay beside her, stroking her hair, whispering soft nothings. But in the back of his mind, he was already mapping the road to freedom, the road to Amara. Annabelle had given him everything, and he would take it all. End of Chapter 5. Chapter 6. Beneath the Night Sky. The stars were sharp that night, too bright, too many, like they were watching. Quasi sat alone on the steps behind the slave quarters, a thin blanket pulled over his shoulders. The summer storm had passed, leaving the night heavy and cool, with crickets singing their morning song and the wind whispering secrets through the trees. His body ached, not from the day's work, but from her, from Annabelle. She had stolen pieces of him in that cabin. She'd clung to him like he was salvation, like her skin on his would rewrite the world. She whispered promises into his neck. She cried out his name like it belonged to her. But none of it had moved him, not truly. He had given her what she wanted, what she craved, but he hadn't given her himself. Because that part of him, the part that breathed freely, the part that loved, that belonged, that part had been stolen long ago and placed gently in the hands of another, Amara. The memory of her came tonight like it hadn't in weeks. Quasi closed his eyes and saw her, deep brown skin, lips like summer fruit, eyes that held galaxies. She had a laugh that could make him forget hunger, and hands that once traced freedom across his chest in whispered touch. They had laid beneath the stars once, just like this, not in a mansion, not in a cabin, in the open, wrapped in moonlight, limbs entangled, hearts beating like war drums. He could still feel her fingers brushing his face. "You'll come back for me," she had said. "You'll run and I'll run, and we'll find each other on the other side of the sun." He had sworn it, and now here he was, letting another woman believe in a lie so he could make that promise come true. Behind him, the door creaked softly. Quasi didn't turn, he didn't have to. Annabelle stepped out in her nightgown, her blonde hair loose, her eyes soft with something too close to hope. "I looked for you," she said gently. He nodded once, slowly. She came to sit beside him. Her shoulder brushed his. Her fingers grazed his hand. They sat in silence for a long moment, staring up at the stars he no longer trusted. "You're quiet tonight," she said. "I'm tired." "Of me?" He turned his head to look at her. Her eyes were glassy, full of questions she didn't want the answers to. Quasi didn't lie. He simply said, no. It was true. He wasn't tired of her. He was tired of the game, of the masks, of the distance between who he had to be and who he truly was. But he couldn't stop now, not when he was so close. Annabelle leaned against him, resting her head on his shoulder. He let her, because sometimes even lies had weight, and sometimes wearing them was part of the path to truth. Above them, the stars kept watching. End of Chapter 6. Chapter 7. Amara's Song. The wind carried voices, not in words, but in memory. Amara stood by the edge of the stream, her bare feet pressing into the wet earth, her skirt swaying around her calves. The sky above her was streaked with pale gold and soft gray. the last light of day giving everything a kind of sorrowful beauty. She hummed. It was an old melody, the kind her grandmother used to sing over pots of stew, over bundles of herbs, over babies swaddled in linen. It wasn't a song for joy or grief. It was for enduring, for holding the center steady when the world tried to pull it apart. Her voice was soft but sure, threading through the trees, carried downstream like a secret. It was her offering to the night, to her ancestors, to the stars, and to him, Quasi. She closed her eyes and could still feel him, the weight of his hand at the small of her back, the press of his forehead against hers, the whispered promises in his native tongue that made her skin hum. They had been torn apart the day the men rode in, shouting, striking, dragging him from her arms. She'd screamed, she'd fought. She'd clawed at the dirt, at the hooves, at the hands that stole him. And when they were gone, she had dug her fingers into the ground and sworn to wait. She hadn't cried since. Instead, she sang. Every night, by the water. Every time the sky looked like it might bleed. She sang because she knew he would hear her. Not with his ears, but with something deeper. Amara was not like the other women on the neighboring plantation. She did not flinch when the overseer raised his voice. She did not cower when the master's sons looked too long. There was a fire in her, not loud, but endless. She worked. She waited. She remembered. And when she dreamed of Quasi's hands, of the way he used to trace symbols on her stomach after they made love, drawing maps with his fingertips, whispering the names of stars she'd never seen. One day, he had told her, we'll walk under them, free. I'll find you, Amma. I'll find you. She had believed him then. She still did now. Amara opened her eyes, looking across the stream toward the tree line. Somewhere beyond those trees, he was still alive. She knew it. She could feel it in her bones, in her blood, in the song. So she sang again, stronger now, her voice breaking the quiet. And across the distance, beneath a different sky, Quasi sat alone in the dark, staring up at the stars. A chill ran through him, though the night was warm. His hand moved to his chest, right where her voice used to settle. He didn't smile, but he did whisper, soon. End of Chapter 7. Chapter 8. Eternal Vow. He found her at the river, not in a dream, not in memory, in the flesh, real, breathing, alive. She turned at the sound of his footsteps, her spine straightening, her lips parting, her breath catching in her throat like it didn't believe her eyes. Quasi. His name fell from her like prayer. He didn't speak. He couldn't. He closed the distance between them in 5 long strides, wrapped his arms around her waist, and lifted her off the ground. Her legs came around him without hesitation, her fingers buried in his hair. Her sob was silent but violent, the kind that had waited years to escape. They clung to each other like drowning people, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, he let himself feel. Tears traced silent lines down his cheeks as he buried his face in her neck, breathing her in. The scent of earth and jasmine and something purely, unmistakably her. I kept my promise, he whispered against her skin. She pulled back, cupping his face in her hands, and I kept mine. Their lips met, not with hunger, but reverence. Time unraveled. They found shelter beneath an old tree, hidden in a thicket surrounded by moss and memory. The ground was soft with grass. The air was thick with warmth and whispered wind. Quasi undressed her slowly, carefully, like unwrapping something sacred. Each layer of clothing was removed with hands that trembled from restraint, not uncertainty. Amara didn't rush him. Her eyes watched every move, her breath soft, her skin humming beneath his touch. When he bared her breasts to the night, he stared, not in lust, but awe. Her skin held new scars, her hips had widened slightly, Her belly bore faint marks from hard labor. He kissed each one, not as apology, as acknowledgement. She wasn't who she had been, neither was he, and yet they fit. Amara removed his shirt next. Her fingers traced the scars on his back, the rope burns on his wrists, the hollowness in his ribs. She kissed them all. When he finally laid her down, the earth cradled them. Leaves whispered, stars bore witness. Their bodies came together like they had never separated. He entered her slowly, the way one returns home after too long away, inch by inch, breath by breath. She gasped softly, her legs wrapping around his waist, her arms anchoring him. Their rhythm was not rushed, not frantic. It was deliberate. Quasi moved inside her like a man learning her again, relearning the way her body responded to his, the way her breath stuttered when he pressed deeper, the way her nails scraped down his back when he hit the spot that made her cry out. He watched her face, watched every flicker of pleasure cross her brow, every moan slip from her lips. His hands roamed her body, memorizing it all over again. She ran her fingers through his hair, across his cheek, over his chest, whispering between gasps. I dreamed of this, every night. So did I, he said against her mouth. Her climax was slow and shaking, a long, rising wave that overtook her like thunder. Her legs trembled around him. Her body bowed, pressed, surrendered. She wept, silent tears spilling down her temples. Quasi didn't stop. He moved harder then, deeper, chasing his own release, but not alone. When it came, he groaned into her neck, body shuddering, emptying years of rage and love and pain into her womb like an offering. They stayed tangled long after, limbs loose, hearts steady. And when the moon was high above them, he kissed her forehead and whispered, "You are my vow, my freedom." Amara kissed him back and said, "And you are my forever." End of Chapter 8. Chapter 9. Love and Lies. She waited until midnight. The air was thick with silence, the kind that clung to the skin and whispered promises no one should make. The big house was asleep, save for one dim candle flickering in the corner room, hers. Annabelle paced barefoot across the wooden floor, her thin nightgown clinging to her body like breath. Her fingers trembled as they brushed over her throat, then down her sides, as if trying to calm the thunder of nerves rattling inside her. She'd sent for him with a note, hidden in a fold of cloth, passed discreetly to one of the kitchen girls who dared not ask questions. "Come to me, tonight, please." Now she waited, heart pounding in her ears, staring at the door like it held her future. And when it finally creaked open, she nearly sobbed. Quasi. He stood there in the dark, tall, broad, and silent. He didn't speak. He just stepped inside, closing the door behind him. The room shifted. So did the air between them. Annabelle crossed the floor slowly, eyes never leaving his. Her hand reached for his chest, tentative, worshipful, as though touching him was still forbidden. He didn't stop her. She pressed her palm flat over his heart. "You came." Quasi's voice was low. "You asked." She smiled, a soft and fragile thing. "I wanted to feel you." He didn't respond with words. Instead, he cupped her jaw and kissed her. Not roughly, not gently. With just enough heat to make her breath hitch, and just enough detachment to keep her guessing. She melted into him. Clothes fell away like petals from a dying bloom. Her nightgown slid from her shoulders, revealing soft curves and pale, trembling flesh. He touched her breasts like they were something to be studied, then kissed his way down her sternum, leaving her gasping. She ran her hands over his torso. Thick muscle, dark skin, marked by a life she could never understand. It thrilled her, the difference, the danger. He picked her up with ease and laid her down on the edge of her bed. Her legs parted instinctively. She was already wet. "Please," she whispered, her voice a prayer. Kwasi lowered himself over her, pressing inside in one slow, deep stroke. Her mouth fell open in a soundless cry, her body arching into his, clutching at his back like she was falling and he was the only solid thing in the world. To her, it was rapture. To him, it was control. He moved with perfect rhythm, slow enough to make her beg, hard enough to keep her mind spinning. He whispered her name once. She gasped and repeated his like it was holy. Elijah. The name stung, but he let it slide. Annabelle wrapped her arms around him and kissed his mouth like she wanted to live inside it. I love you, she whispered against his cheek. I love you so much it hurts. He moaned softly in response, dragging his mouth down her neck, biting just hard enough to make her writhe. Her orgasm came like a storm, sudden, loud, breaking her open. Her body trembled beneath him, slick and spent and whispering broken things. And when he followed, groaning into her shoulder, spilling inside her, she wept. Not because of pain, because in her heart, she believed he was hers. Afterward, they lay tangled in the dim candlelight. She stroked his chest, her cheek pressed to his skin, her fingers drawing shapes that meant forever. Kwasi stared at the ceiling. His arms held her loosely, but his thoughts were far away. He thought of the river, of Amara's lips, of the path already unfolding before him. This was not love. This was leverage. But he let Annabelle sleep in the crook of his arm, whispering his name in her dreams. Because sometimes the most powerful lies are the ones we let others tell themselves. End of Chapter 9. Chapter 10. The Seed of Jealousy. At first, it was just a look. Barely a second. A glance. A smile. Annabelle stood at the edge of the courtyard, shielded by the columns of the veranda, watching him. Watching her. The girl was young, barefoot, her dress too thin for the chill that had settled in the morning air. She was struggling with a heavy basket of wet laundry, her arms shaking under the weight. Kwasi stepped forward without a word. He lifted the basket from her arms as if it weighed nothing, his touch gentle, his voice too low to hear from a distance. The girl smiled, not shyly, gratefully. She reached out and touched his forearm, murmured something, and laughed. Kwasi smiled back, just for a second. Annabelle's nails dug into the wood of the column. Later, she cornered him near the well. Her dress was immaculate, her curls pinned tightly, her gloves clutched in one hand like she had been waiting. Who was she? Her voice was light, too light, her smile thin as paper. Kwasi turned, wiping his brow with the back of his arm. Who? The girl. Her tone sharpened just slightly. The one with the laundry, you seemed familiar. Kwasi didn't blink. She dropped her load. I helped. Of course, Annabelle said, though her jaw clenched. You're very helpful. Kwasi only looked at her. Not warm, not cold, just unreadable. And that made it worse. The days that followed offered her no peace. She saw him speaking to an older woman near the fields, adjusting the strap of her water jug. She caught sight of him laughing, with a group of children near the barn. But he was never that warm with her anymore, not since that night. Not since he held her, made love to her, whispered back her I love you in the dark, and then disappeared into silence again. She waited for the notes, for the hidden looks, for the touches. But Kwasi had grown distant, measured. She reached for him and found only duty, and the seed began to bloom. One night, unable to bear it any longer, she slipped into the servants' quarters. He wasn't alone. He wasn't with anyone, but he was sitting near the fire, speaking softly to an older man with a walking stick. His expression was gentle, his posture relaxed, different. Annabelle stayed in the shadows, her breath quickening, jealousy curling through her like smoke. He gave them something he never gave her: comfort, trust, honesty. And she hated it. When he returned to her room days later, at her request, she kissed him like she was starving, scratched her nails down his back, bit into his shoulder like she needed to mark him. Quasi responded with practiced skill. He touched her the way he always had, perfectly. But she felt the difference now. It was mechanical, controlled. And when he held her afterward, she asked softly, "Do you think about other women?" Quasi looked down at her. "Why would I?" "I see you," she said, helping them, talking to them, smiling. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "That's not what this is." But the crack had already formed. Later that night, alone in her bed, Annabelle stared at the ceiling and whispered a name to herself. A name she'd overheard in a breath. A name Quasi had said once when he thought no one was listening. Amara. And with that single name, jealousy took root, deep, bitter, and blooming. End of Chapter 10. Chapter 11. The Game He Plays. Annabelle lit the lamp herself that night. She didn't call for the maids, didn't send a note. She didn't need to. He would come. She'd made sure of it. Had sent word through the kitchen girl just like before. But this time she added a single line at the bottom of the parchment. "If you don't come, I'll know why." She didn't know where the line between need and madness had blurred, only that it had. She could feel it now, the ache in her chest, the weight in her bones, the fear she could no longer name. She wore the red silk gown, the one with the low neckline, the one that draped off her shoulders like water, that clung to her like the want in her throat. When the door opened, she didn't turn. She stood at the window, watching the moon bleed into the night sky. Quasi stepped in without a word. The door closed softly behind him. She could feel his presence like gravity, heavy, calm, patient, dangerous. "You came," she said. "You asked," he replied. Annabelle turned to face him, her lips parted. She crossed the room slowly, the silk whispering around her legs. When she reached him, she didn't touch him right away. She just looked at him, studied him. "Do you love me?" she asked. Quasi didn't flinch. His eyes searched hers. "What do you feel when I touch you?" "That's not the same." "It's what I can give." She stepped closer, laying her hand over his heart. "But is it real?" Quasi's eyes lowered. His silence was artful. Not too quick, not too long. Then, "It's the only thing that feels real in this place." It was vague, ambiguous, perfect. Annabelle swallowed, the lump in her throat trembling like her hands. "You've changed," she whispered, "since that night. You pull away. You help the others. You smile when I'm not looking." Quasi reached up and gently tucked a strand of her hair behind her ear. "Do you know what it is to belong nowhere?" he said. "To be everyone's and no one's?" Annabelle blinked. "You belong to me." He tilted his head as if weighing her words. "No," he said, voice low. "I'm not something to be owned, but with you, I'm allowed to be human." Her breath caught. He stepped closer now, his hand gliding down her arm, slow and sure. "I don't smile for them," he said. "I survive with them." "And with me?" she asked, voice thin. "I live." Tears welled in her eyes. He caught one with his thumb before it could fall and leaned in. When he kissed her, she melted. They moved to the bed. Their bodies joined again, skin on skin, breath tangled. But this time, it wasn't lust driving her. It was desperation. She clung to him, buried herself in him, begged him silently to stay. Quasi gave her everything she needed to believe. His hands were soft. His eyes were gentle. He whispered her name like it mattered. But in his mind, he was building a map. Each moan, each tear, each trembling plea, a piece of the path to freedom. She thought he gave her his heart. She had no idea how far he'd already gone. End of Chapter 11. Chapter 12. Quiet Rumblings. Something had shifted. The air around the plantation was still thick with heat and sweat, But now there was something else beneath it, something tighter, coiled, uneasy. Quasi noticed it first in the way the overseers stood together longer than usual, whispering between themselves with narrowed eyes. Then came the changes in routine. Guards repositioned, routes altered, conversations interrupted by silence too sudden to be innocent. He adjusted. He always did. But inside, his clock ticked faster now. It was almost time. Annabelle, meanwhile, was glowing. She walked through the gardens with a smile that curled at the corners, her hands folded delicately, a daydream in her eyes. She still met with him, late at night, behind closed doors, in stolen moments between duty and scandal. And every time he touched her, whispered to her, held her afterward, she believed a little more. She believed this was love. She believed she was saving him. She didn't see the blueprint behind his gaze, the way he watched patterns of patrol, memorized door hinges, calculated sunrise and shadows. She simply saw a man softening, trusting. "You're different," she said one evening, curled in his lap beneath a blanket in the storage shed. "How so?" "Lighter, like something's lifting from you." Quasi pressed a kiss to her temple. "Maybe something is." She smiled and buried her face into his chest, never noticing the way his eyes stayed open, sharp, scanning the darkness. By day, he worked harder than ever, not out of loyalty, but to lower suspicion. He made friends, helped without being asked, nodded without speaking too much, slipped questions into conversation with the other men, learning who'd been caught before and what had failed. And by night, he walked the paths he would one day run, counted steps, marked trees, learned the sound of each board beneath his feet. The whisper of escape is a living thing. It spreads in small places, lingers in corners, lives in cautious glances and silent nods. Quasi felt it in the way one of the older women looked at him one morning, not accusing, not afraid, knowing. She said nothing, but she tucked a piece of dried bread into his hand that night without a word. And Annabelle? She watched him more closely now, not because she feared him, but because she wanted more of him. She began asking strange questions. "If I helped you leave," she said one night, "would you come back for me?" Quasi held her face in both hands, thumbs brushing over her cheeks, and said, "You'd be part of my freedom." And she cried, soft tears that soaked into his shoulder as she nodded, promising herself that if she helped him escape, he'd have no choice but to love her forever. But neither of them knew that someone else had seen them that night. Just a glimpse, a flicker of candlelight through cracked boards, a whisper in the dark, and that someone didn't sleep well after. End of Chapter 12. Chapter 13. Hidden Things. It started with the sickness. Annabelle blamed the weather, or the food. She'd skipped breakfast, barely touched lunch, and by the time she walked into the garden and sat on the stone bench beneath the magnolia tree, the world had tilted sideways. She bent forward, pressing her fingers to her forehead. Her stomach lurched. When the maid found her like that, pale, sweating, she quickly fetched water. "It's the heat," Annabelle murmured. "It'll pass." But the heat had never made her breasts ache like this, had never made her nauseous at the smell of coffee, had never made her feel like she might snap in half from nothing at all. Quasi noticed. He saw the small winces she tried to hide, the way she touched her lower back more often, how she snapped at the kitchen girl, then immediately apologized with a voice too sweet to be sincere. She was unraveling, slowly, silently. He didn't mention it. He simply held her when she asked, listened when she cried for no reason, kissed her neck when she clung to him like a woman drowning. Inside, he wondered. It wasn't the right time. He couldn't afford for her to fall apart. Not yet. Annabelle still believed in the fantasy. In her head, she saw them running. Together. She imagined herself on a horse, wind in her hair, Quasi beside her, protecting her from the world that would come for them. She never imagined he'd leave without her. She certainly didn't imagine why she felt so strange, so tender, so tired. She sat at her vanity one evening, brushing her hair with slow, distracted strokes. Her breasts were heavier, her waist had thickened ever so slightly. Her dreams had grown vivid, flashes of water, blood, cries in the dark. She placed a hand low on her belly, then shook her head. No. But her body knew. When she lay with Quasi now, she wept more often, held him longer, asked him strange questions. Do you think about what comes after? After what? After freedom. After all of this. Quasi didn't answer, because for him, freedom was the only thing. Not the after, not the dream. Just the moment when the chains fell off. She began collecting little things in a box beneath her bed. Scraps of fabric, dried flowers, a bit of ribbon she found in the hallway. She didn't know why. She just did. And one morning, just before dawn, she stood by her window and pressed her palm against her stomach. It was flat still, but something inside her stirred. And for a moment, a single moment, fear crept in. Then she closed the curtain and pretended it wasn't real, because it couldn't be. Not yet. End of Chapter 13. Chapter 14. Secret Paths. The first time she helped him, it was simple. She stole a map from her father's study, an old one, fraying at the edges, the ink faded from sun and time. It showed rivers, roads, tree lines. She brought it to him wrapped in a piece of linen, her hands shaking slightly as she placed it in his. I thought it might help, when it's time. Quasi unfolded it slowly, his eyes scanning it like scripture. His finger traced the path northward, across 2 counties, into the thickets that bordered the free lines. This is good, he said softly. Her breath hitched in pleasure. He looked up at her and smiled, small, careful, intimate. It was enough to make her chest ache. She began leaving other things, bread wrapped in cloth, a water flask, a stolen compass from her brother's drawer. Each gift brought her closer to the fantasy she clung to, the one where they ran together, hand in hand, vanishing into the trees while the world burned behind them. I'll leave the cellar door open tomorrow night, she whispered one evening, fingers tangled in his shirt. No one goes down there after dark. You can wait there until it's safe. Quasi brushed his lips against her forehead. You're saving me. No, she whispered. We're saving each other. He didn't correct her. They met in secret more often now, in storage rooms, behind the garden wall, beneath the old oak tree where the ground was soft with leaves. She would press herself into him like she was trying to climb inside his skin, and every time he kissed her, he counted the hours. Meanwhile, his plans took form. The exit routes, the false trail, the stolen tools. He spoke to no one, not even the ones he trusted. Loose lips had ended too many men before him. But the fire was burning now, not in his body, but in his mind. He could see it, smell it, taste it. The night was coming. And Annabelle? She floated through each day like a girl in love, giddy, nervous, sick more often than not. She still hadn't named the thing growing inside her, but her hands touched her belly more now, subconsciously, protectively, and still she believed. You'll come back for me? She asked him one night as they lay tangled in sheets. Quasi looked at her and lied. Yes. End of Chapter 14. Chapter 15. The Silence Before the Storm. The air had changed. Not the heat that still clung to the skin like wet cloth, but something deeper, something low and still, like the earth itself was holding its breath. Quasi felt it in his bones. He moved through the fields with practiced ease, his eyes calm, his steps unhurried. But every moment was measured, every sound registered, every shadow meant something. The time was near. Annabelle, meanwhile, had begun to unravel. Her mood shifted by the hour, laughter one moment, silence the next. She snapped at servants, she wept when no one watched. And at night, when she lay curled beside Quasi, her body ached in unfamiliar ways. The nausea had returned. So had the fatigue. She'd nearly fainted during breakfast 2 days prior. Her father had called for the doctor, but she'd waved him off. "I'm just tired," she said, "that's all." But in her heart, she knew something was wrong, or right, or irreversible. She touched her belly now when she thought no one saw, resting her hand low as if waiting for a sign. And Quasi? He noticed. He said nothing, but in the quiet moments between dusk and darkness, he began to wonder, not with fear, with urgency. Each night he practiced, opening the hidden door with silent fingers, slipping between fences without stirring the dogs, timing the guard's rotation to the second. Annabelle helped when she could, left keys in the trough, maps under floorboards, food wrapped in linen. But she was changing, faster than he expected. She clung to him longer now, kissed him deeper, asked questions that tasted like desperation. "What will it be like," she whispered one night, "when we're gone? When it's just us?" Quasi kissed her forehead. Quiet, safe. She smiled. "I'll give you everything, I swear it." He pressed a hand to her side, over her ribs, where her skin felt warmer, fuller. "I know," he said. Around them, others began to notice. The overseer lingered longer in doorways. A maid watched Annabelle with narrowed eyes. The stable boy went quiet whenever Quasi passed. No one spoke aloud, but eyes carry truths before mouths do, and Quasi saw them all. One night, the sky broke. Thunder cracked like a whip across the hills, and rain poured down in violent sheets. Quasi stood outside the quarter door, drenched, eyes closed, letting the cold cut through him. In that moment, he was no one's, no woman's, no master's, no past, no pain. He was wind, and fire, and silence. And when the storm ended, he walked inside, knelt by his cot, and whispered the words only the dark could hear. Tomorrow. End of chapter 15. Chapter 16. The Run. The world was still when he moved. Not quiet, still, as if even the wind had paused to watch. Quasi stepped out from beneath the sloped edge of the storage barn, his body pressed low to the earth, his breath silent, his hands steady. The moon was high but veiled by clouds, casting only the faintest silver across the dirt. It was time. He crossed the field like smoke, unseen, unfelt. He knew where to step, which grass wouldn't crunch, which plank wouldn't creak, which shadow belonged to the trees and which belonged to something more dangerous. His heartbeat was slow, controlled. But his mind? It screamed. Every noise was a threat, every light a warning. Every memory of a man caught and dragged back was a knife against his spine. He kept moving. The cellar door was unlocked, just as Annabelle had promised. He slid it open carefully, paused, listened, then descended into the dark. There, tucked behind crates of apples and salt, were the supplies: the map, the bread, the flask. Even a small blade, dull but sharp enough to matter if it came to that. He took it all, tied it to his belt. He didn't let himself think of her. Didn't think of the way her lips trembled when she whispered, "I love you." Didn't think of the soft way she touched his chest, the way she looked when she believed they had a future. Because that wasn't his truth. His truth lived somewhere beyond the trees, beyond the line, in the sound of her name, Amara. He slipped out the back of the cellar and sprinted across the stable yard, body low, movement clean. The dogs were asleep. The guards were slow tonight, dulled by drink and routine. At the fence, he paused, fingers gripping the post, and looked back. Not at the house, not at the fields, but at the sky, at the stars. He whispered a word in his mother's tongue, then climbed. The woods were alive. Branches clawed at his arms, roots reached for his feet. The wind howled secrets in his ears. He ran anyway, faster, deeper. Through brush and thorn and riverbed, through dark and fear and hunger. 1 mile, 2. Every breath burned. His legs screamed. His side ached like it was splitting open, but he kept going. Because behind him was slavery, and ahead of him was everything else. He didn't stop until the moon dipped low and the trees thinned. His body collapsed beside a stream, chest heaving, eyes scanning the darkness for movement. Nothing. Only frogs, and wind, and the shivering quiet of a man who had made it through the first gate of hell. He didn't cry. He didn't smile. He just stared at the sky and whispered, "I'm coming, Amma." Then he pressed his hand to the dirt and felt it for the first time, not as a prisoner, but as a man becoming free. End of chapter 16. Chapter 17. Gone. Something was wrong. Annabelle knew it the moment she woke. The air was too quiet, the sun too bright. She rolled over, fingers reaching for him. The spot beside her was cold, not recently left, long left. She sat up slowly, the sheets pooling around her waist, and stared at the door. Open. Half a breath, half a thought. Then she was out of the bed. The cellar was empty. The floorboards creaked beneath her as she stepped down, her nightgown billowing around her legs. The space where she had hidden the food, the map, the compass. Gone. All of it. Her breath caught in her throat, not like a gasp, like a choke. She ran through the yard barefoot, the morning dew soaking her hem, her hair coming loose from its braid. She didn't care. Her fingers clutched at the edge of the stable door, the fence, the post where they used to whisper in the dark. Nothing. No footprints, no hint. He was gone. At breakfast, she sat across from her father, her hands trembling over her teacup. He didn't notice. He never did. But the maid pouring the cream saw the way Annabelle's lip trembled, the way her eyes never focused. "Are you unwell, Miss LeClaire?" Annabelle blinked. Her voice was a whisper. "I think I'm dreaming." Later, she went to the shed, the one where he kissed her the first time, where he told her what she needed to hear. She touched the wood, and something inside her cracked. She dropped to her knees in the straw and screamed. No sound, just breath and breaking and fists in the dirt. He was gone, and he hadn't said goodbye. Days passed in a blur. She stopped eating, stopped speaking. At night, she clutched a shirt he had left behind, crumpled and worn and smelling faintly of sweat and pine. She pressed it to her face and whispered, "Why?" Then the sickness came back. Worse. Her stomach turned at the smell of eggs. Her body ached in ways she couldn't explain. The maid noticed, whispered behind doors. Her father knocked once, then barged in. "What is this nonsense?" he snapped. "Lying in bed like a common lunatic?" She didn't answer. His eyes scanned the room, saw the discarded food, the empty basin, the hollow look in her face. Something shifted in his gaze. He stepped forward, slowly, like he already knew. His voice dropped. "You're not carrying—" Annabelle blinked. The silence between them swelled. And in that moment, that awful, fragile, devastating moment, she knew. Her hand drifted down to her belly, a whisper of movement, a flicker of life. The tears came hard this time, not from heartbreak, from truth. She was pregnant, and he was gone. End of chapter 17. Chapter 18. No Man's Land. There is a place between chains and liberation, not quite death, not quite life. No Man's Land. And Quasi was in it now. The woods had thickened into something ancient. Trees rose like sentries, their branches clawing at the sky, their roots twisted and waiting to trip the unprepared. He moved through them like a ghost, silent, breath shallow, steps practiced. Every sound was a threat, every shadow a question. He hadn't slept in a day. His legs ached. His stomach had turned on itself, chewing through hunger with nothing left to burn. But he kept going, because he had tasted open air, and he would not go back. He crossed 2 creeks. The second had blood in it, not his own. Something small had died there. He rinsed his hands anyway and drank. The water was bitter and sweet at once. At night, he curled beneath a tangle of brush, his body wrapped in stillness, his knife pressed to his chest. He dreamed of dogs, of white men shouting, of Amara calling his name through fire. He woke in sweat, but alive. On the fourth day, he found a boot print, too fresh. He froze, listened. No sound. He turned east instead of north, followed the moss, left no tracks. He was close now. He could feel it. The next night, rain came again, but this was not the soft, sorrowful kind. This was violent. The sky cracked open and poured rage. Lightning chased him across a ridge. Thunder answered with fury. The path turned to sludge, and still he ran, because running meant breathing, and breathing meant Amara. He slipped once, hard, his foot catching beneath a root, sending him sprawling into the mud. The knife flew. His shoulder screamed. He lay there, face down, the storm raging above, the ground swallowing him whole. And he almost let go. Almost. Until her voice came, not in sound, in memory. "I'll wait for you, even if the sky burns down." He growled low in his throat, rolled onto his back, and stared up at the bruised sky. "Not yet," he whispered, then pushed himself to his feet. By morning, the rain had stopped. The path ahead bent toward pine trees and distant light, not from torches, from fire pits. Smoke curled into the sky like a promise, and somewhere past that smoke was the line. Not drawn on a map, drawn in blood, in sacrifice. He pressed his hand to the tree beside him, steadying himself, then stepped forward, into the firelight of freedom. End of chapter 18. Chapter 19. Through the thicket. The ground changed first. The thick, soggy clay of the southern forest gave way to drier soil, packed and worn. The trees thinned just slightly. The air felt lighter. Not safe, but not death. Closer. Quasi crouched behind a fallen log, eyes scanning the ridge ahead. Smoke from a distant fire drifted upward. Not plantation smoke, not iron and blood, but something softer, domestic, settler, northern maybe. He didn't move yet. He watched. Two men sat at the fire. One was white, grizzled, with a long coat and slow movements. The other was black, older, still. Quasi waited for a sign. It came in the form of silence. The white man stepped away. The black man turned, just slightly, and spit into the flame. Then, without looking, he muttered low into the air, "Ain't no dogs in this part. Come if you're ready." Quasi didn't hesitate. He stepped from the shadows. The man didn't look up, didn't speak again, just reached behind the log and handed him a flask. "Drink slow," he said, "and don't fall." Quasi drank. Water, cool, real. He swallowed, closed his eyes, and nearly wept, but he didn't. They didn't ask his name, didn't ask where he came from, didn't need to. The man gave him bread, a clean cloth, a wrapped note. "There's a wagon coming through the creek bed just before night. 1 horse. Driver's death, knows the way." Quasi nodded. "How far?" 3 days, 2 if you run." He would run. The thicket came next. A stretch of bramble and pine and thorn designed by nature to keep men from crossing. Quasi didn't hesitate. He pushed through. Thorns tore at his shirt. Blood bloomed across his chest, his arms. He moved like a man with fire behind him and stars ahead. Branches snapped. A snake hissed somewhere in the brush. He didn't stop. The other side opened like a gasp. Rolling green hills. No fences, no whips, no shadows in the trees, just air, real air. He dropped to his knees and pressed his hands to the earth. Not red, not cursed, just earth. That night, he slept beside the creek. Not out of fear, out of choice. He dreamed of her, of Amara, not calling, just waiting. End of chapter 19. Chapter 20. Return. She was by the water, where she always waited. Amara stood barefoot on the stream's edge, her dress fluttering in the breeze, her hands cupped beneath the current, letting the water run between her fingers. Her eyes were far away, focused on something not of this world, but just beyond it. She did not hear him at first, not the footstep, not the breath, not even the rustle of the leaves, but she turned anyway and saw him. For a moment, neither moved. She dropped the water from her hands. He stepped forward. Her lips parted. No sound, just air. Just the kind of silence that holds an entire lifetime inside it. Then, Quasi. He ran. She met him halfway. They collided like thunder. His arms wrapped around her so tightly she gasped. Her hands clutched the back of his shirt, his neck, his face, as if she were checking to make sure he wasn't a dream. She cried first. Not loud, not broken. Just a slow, warm release that soaked into his shoulder. Quasi pulled back just enough to look at her. He cupped her face in his hands, kissed her forehead, her nose, her chin, then her mouth. It was not a kiss of hunger. It was recognition. Of soul. Of breath. Of home. She kissed him back with everything she'd saved. He carried her inside the cabin, a small place nestled deep in the trees, quiet and filled with warmth. She undressed him slowly, her fingers pausing at each scar, each mark. She kissed them all. When she slipped her dress over her head, he saw the changes. Fuller curves, new lines, strength where sorrow once lived. "You're still mine," he whispered. "I was always yours." They made love on the floor, on a blanket of moss and linen, with the fire crackling beside them. Quasi moved inside her slowly, reverently, like he was praying. Amara touched his face, his chest, his heart. Their rhythm was steady, deep. No games, no lies. Just sweat and skin and soul. When she came, her body arched beneath him, her breath shaking, her eyes locked on his. When he came, it was a surrender, a shedding of every chain he'd ever worn. Afterward, they lay wrapped in each other, the firelight flickering over their skin. "You came back," she whispered. "I told you I would." She smiled against his chest, and for the first time in years, he slept. Not as a runaway, not as a slave, not even as a survivor, but as a man who was loved. End of Chapter 20. Chapter 20. Return. She was by the water, where she always waited. Amara stood barefoot on the stream's edge, her dress fluttering in the breeze, her hands cupped beneath the current, letting the water run between her fingers. Her eyes were far away, focused on something not of this world, but just beyond it. She did not hear him at first, not the footstep, not the breath, not even the rustle of the leaves, but she turned anyway and saw him. For a moment, neither moved. She dropped the water from her hands. He stepped forward. Her lips parted. No sound, just air. Just the kind of silence that holds an entire lifetime inside it. Then, Quasi. He ran. She met him halfway. They collided like thunder. His arms wrapped around her so tightly she gasped. Her hands clutched the back of his shirt, his neck, his face, as if she were checking to make sure he wasn't a dream. She cried first. Not loud, not broken. Just a slow, warm release that soaked into his shoulder. Quasi pulled back just enough to look at her. He cupped her face in his hands, kissed her forehead, her nose, her chin, then her mouth. It was not a kiss of hunger. It was recognition. Of soul. Of breath. Of home. She kissed him back with everything she'd saved. He carried her inside the cabin, a small place nestled deep in the trees, quiet and filled with warmth. She undressed him slowly, her fingers pausing at each scar, each mark. She kissed them all. When she slipped her dress over her head, he saw the changes. Fuller curves, new lines, strength where sorrow once lived. "You're still mine," he whispered. "I was always yours." They made love on the floor, on a blanket of moss and linen, with the fire crackling beside them. Quasi moved inside her slowly, reverently, like he was praying. Amara touched his face, his chest, his heart. Their rhythm was steady, deep. No games, no lies. Just sweat and skin and soul. When she came, her body arched beneath him, her breath shaking, her eyes locked on his. When he came, it was a surrender, a shedding of every chain he'd ever worn. Afterward, they lay wrapped in each other, the firelight flickering over their skin. "You came back," she whispered. "I told you I would." She smiled against his chest, and for the first time in years, he slept. Not as a runaway, not as a slave, not even as a survivor, but as a man who was loved. End of Chapter 20. Chapter 21. In the Light. Quasi dreamed of running, not like before, not chased, not hunted. He dreamed of running toward something, through the trees, over hills, his lungs full of clean air, the sun rising behind him. He woke with sweat on his brow, and beside him, Amara. Her belly round with new life, her skin glowing in the early light, her hand already reaching for his in her sleep. He exhaled, and the fear melted. The children came like spring, quiet at first, then bursting with life. Their first was a girl. He named her Sade for the strength of her silence. Then came Kofi with wide eyes and hands that gripped everything. Then another, a boy they named Mensa, born in the deep of winter with a scream like thunder. They lived simply. The cabin grew with time. So did their garden. So did their laughter. Quasi worked with his hands, built furniture, carved wood, hunted game. His body never forgot survival, but his heart began to learn peace. Amara taught other women how to brew herbs, ease birth pains, write letters. Her songs returned, fuller now, layered with joy instead of longing. And at night they sat beneath the stars, not to pray, but to remember. One night, years later, Quasi woke from another dream. This one was darker. He was running again, but never arriving, always looking for her. The trees never stopped. The path never ended. He reached out in his sleep, breath shallow, heart racing. Then, a soft voice. "Quasi." His eyes opened. Amara sat beside him in the firelight, round with their fourth child. She was glowing, soft, whole. "You were running again," she whispered. He nodded, still dazed. "I couldn't find you." "But I was here," she said, taking his hand and placing it over her stomach. "I've always been here." He kissed her palm, then her lips, then her belly, and the fear left him. Later that morning, he stood outside the cabin with his youngest son on his hip and watched the sun rise over the hills. For the first time in his life, he wasn't waiting for anything. He was already home. End of Chapter 21. Chapter 22. Her Memory. She hadn't seen him, not at first. She had been buying fabric, something soft for her son's shirt, when the bell above the shop door rang. She glanced up, and time stopped. He stood there, older, taller somehow, stronger. His face was worn in the way men's faces get when they've earned every year. He was talking to the shopkeeper, calm, civil, free. Her breath caught. Her fingers dropped the spool of thread she had been holding. He turned slightly, and their eyes met. It lasted only a second, but it stretched across a decade. Her memory cracked open like a dam. The house, the silence, the moment she realized he was gone. The weeks after, sick and shaking, alone. Then the tightening of her corset, the swelling that would no longer be hidden. Her father's voice, sharp as a blade. "You what?" His face white, then red, then white again, and then the back of his hand. She remembered the screams, the threats, the rage. "I'll see you dead before I let you shame this family." He came with the belt. She ran, out the side door, into the stables. The only ones who helped were those she'd once passed without a glance: the housemaid, the old cook, a stable hand with a limp and a kind face. They packed food, stole a dress, smuggled her out in the back of a cart, and just before they closed the lid, the cook placed a shaking hand on her belly. "You protect him, you hear?" Annabelle nodded and didn't look back. She gave birth in a small town 3 counties away, alone, screaming. Her baby, a boy, came fast and angry and perfect. He had Quasi's eyes and her name. Years passed. She raised him quietly, working as a seamstress, never telling anyone where she was from or what had happened. She never remarried, never even looked at another man. Because no matter what he did, no matter how he left, her heart had stayed with him. And now here he was, in a shop, 4 feet away, not seeing her, because beside him stood a woman, dark-skinned, beautiful, and 2 children. Annabelle didn't move, didn't speak, just stared. And in that quiet, her son walked up beside her. "Mom," he said, tugging her sleeve, "that man, he looks like me." Quasi's head turned again. This time, he saw the boy and froze. End of chapter 22. Chapter 23. The Boy Between Them. He didn't speak, not at first. He simply looked. At the boy, 10, maybe 11, with golden brown skin, wide eyes, and a jawline that mirrored his own like a secret he'd forgotten to keep. The child stared back, confused, curious, tilting his head the same way Quasi did when he was thinking. Annabelle stepped forward, instinctively, one hand reaching to her son's shoulder. Quasi looked up at her, and for the first time in 14 years, their eyes held everything that had ever been unsaid. No anger, no begging, no apology. Just the truth, hanging between them like the breath they both held. The shopkeeper said something, some polite noise about the weather or the cloth, but none of them heard it. The boy looked up at his mother. "Mom, is that?" Annabelle laid a hand over his mouth gently. "Not now, love." Quasi's gaze dropped back to the boy, then to her hand. A small scar peeked from beneath her sleeve, one he remembered giving her ointment for, back when she had burned herself on the fireplace hook. That memory felt like a ghost now. He stepped forward, not to her, to the boy. He crouched down slowly, eyes level. The boy blinked, unsure. Quasi didn't speak. He just looked into the child's face, into his own past. And for a moment, he saw it. Annabelle, alone and afraid, carrying a child through the dark. And the boy, not a mistake, not a secret, just real, alive, his. Amara stood behind him, one hand resting lightly on his shoulder. She had not said a word. She didn't need to. She knew. Quasi stood up, looked at Annabelle again. She held his gaze. Her face, older but still beautiful in that soft, tragic way, did not ask for anything. But her eyes, they begged him to know, to understand. He nodded, just once. And in that small gesture, he gave her everything he could. Not love, not regret, but recognition. He took Amara's hand. Their children waited outside. He turned, walked away, and never looked back. Annabelle stood in the quiet, her son beside her, still watching. She whispered, "Come on, baby." And together, they stepped into the light. End.